Good evening. So today we're going to be going through sections, or basically pages 172, 173, and actually we're going to be going through 175 because 173 it's basically review. So we're going to fly through that. And by the way, how many of you didn't realize that I said that I put in the instructions for the second test that it was open book and open notes? I'm just a little curious, because I know that I think one or two people had mentioned that they didn't prepare very well for it. Oh, by the way, though, if anybody wants to retake part one, let me know, because I think I figured out how to do it. And if anyone wants to retake part two, also let me know. That will not be open book, an open note, like the retake of it will not be. So just let me know, send me an email or something to give me a heads up, and I'll send it to you. Okay. All right, so page 172, Scripture attests to Christ's divinity. So this first subsection, Christ is the Son of God. All right, so it was obvious to everybody at that time that Jesus was human, but his divinity, on the other hand, was a point of contention, to say the least. It's one of the reasons why people wanted him dead, because of his claim to divinity. So obviously the belief that Christ as God the Son is the very foundation of Christianity. We can't escape it. And this teaching is actually found throughout the New Testament. So first we've got the very first verse in John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So John was referring to Jesus as the Logos, which is translated as Word. Well, it's one of the translations. There's actually probably at least a dozen translations of Logos that I'm aware of. But nobody really attests that Word is the most fitting translation for this. It's just that outside of a scriptural context, especially within Greek philosophy, Logos can mean a variety of things, like reason, speech, I don't know. There's a bunch of different translations of it. So this, John saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, is saying that Jesus is consubstantial with the Father, which we say in the Nicene Creed. And consubstantial, that comes from the Latin word meaning of one and the same substance. He does this by calling Jesus Christ the Word, or Logos, or Logos. I don't really know how to pronounce it. And who the Logos has existed from all eternity, and who is a person that is coexistent with God, but in particular God the Father, because he is God. Now, he also tells us that all things came to be through the Word, and the Word was seen as like the fount of eternal life and enlightens all of mankind through his revelation. This reminds me of something that it didn't remind me of when I was writing this down, so I didn't prepare for it. Nah, never mind. I can't go into it. Right, so you see that they view Christ as the Word, and through him all things came to be. And that kind of harkens back to the creation story in Genesis. So God would say something like, "Let there be light," and there was light. So he kind of speaks forth creation. So that should resonate when seeing that, or when hearing that, or seeing that all things came to be through the Word. Now the Word is the Son of God, or God the Son, the only begotten Son of the Father. And the Word was made flesh in order to bring grace and truth to us. And the Word made flesh is Jesus Christ. Next. So this is also from John's Gospel, chapter 5, verse 37. And the Father who sent me has himself borne witness to me. Take a pause for Clean Canteen or Cleanest Cantinas. And remember to hit that subscribe button. So Jesus is also referred to as the Son of God in Luke's account of the Annunciation. Also, you have the story of finding Jesus in the temple. So if you're not familiar with that, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph and a whole bunch of other people go to Jerusalem to celebrate this feast day, and they unknowingly leave without him. So they realize after a day that he's not back with like the other kids in this caravan, and so they have to go back and look for him. After 3 days of not seeing him, they find him, and he's in the temple. And what he says, though, is the key thing. He's like, did you not know that I would be in my Father's house? So that shows his divine filiation. Remember, filiation means sonship. Now, Christ was sent by the Father. Next subsection. So over and over again, Jesus affirms that he was sent by the Father. And in John's Gospel, it says, where we see the expression, he who sent me, over 20 times. And 5 times, we see the expression, he whom God has sent. Excuse me. And Jesus said, I came from the Father. Also, at Jesus' baptism and at the Transfiguration, the Father says, this is my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased. Also, I think at the Transfiguration, he says, listen to him. I think. I want to say that. And then this quote from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 28. I do nothing on my own authority, but speak thus as the Father taught me. So this is actually, I wouldn't well, let me say something and then I'm just going to kind of further clarify it. This is one thing that sets Christianity apart from, I would say, a lot of cults in like the modern day sense of the word. Because Jesus is always like referring back to the Father. He's never, or he rarely just like focuses on himself. I mean, sometimes when he does focus on himself, it's like, it seems very reasonable to do so. It's not all about him. He's definitely referring everything back to the Father. And so that's a good sign. I'm not saying that, I mean, you could say that, well, some cults, again, in the modern day sense of the word, some cults, their leaders would say that, yeah, like God communicates to me directly. And so in a sense you're saying, or he could be saying, or she could be saying that that person is referring back to God. But then again, you also get into that whole secret knowledge crap. And there you can see a big difference between Christianity and some kind of cult. But in the old school sense of the word, like the old meaning of the word cult, it's actually like something that's forming a culture. So those two words are, I mean, if you look at them side by side, it's easy to see that they're related. We don't actually think, or at least I didn't really think about it much until I was reading a book where I saw the word cult come up frequently and in a different way than I was used to seeing it. Then I realized, oh, culture. So it's like, yeah, in a sense, in the old school sense of the word, you would definitely say that Christianity is a cult, or is a cult, because you're trying to form a culture. So that's your random bit of knowledge for the day. All right, next, Christ taught the fullness of God's law. So we're still on page 172, but we're going to move into 173 in a second. So Jesus does affirm equality with God the Father. Now, if any of you are knowledgeable about Scripture, you can say, or you could refer to, I think it was St. Paul's quote saying, Jesus did not look at equality with God as something to be grasped at, but rather took like the form of a, what does he say exactly? I don't know. He says something like that. But to clarify that, it's to be grasped at means like to take hold of it and to is this video not working too well? It's like looks like it's freezing. Sorry, what was I talking about? Oh, grasped. So that's like trying to take hold of something, and that's definitely not what Jesus was doing. So in that sense, like, yeah, you're absolutely right. But he's not talking about really this. He's talking about like taking his stand or grasping, seizing hold of equality with God. But he did this he affirmed his equality with God by applying what was exclusive to God in the Old Testament to himself. So, for example, he forgave sins. He fulfilled or perfected the commandments upon his own authority. So he declared himself Lord of the Sabbath. And we actually just went through this stuff, the rest of this stuff, so we're just going to kind of fly right through it. So 173, Christ forgave sins. What I just said. So that's an action that only God can do. And to kind of back up his action or his claim to be able to forgive sins, he would heal people as well. Next, Christ said he will judge the world. So in the Old Testament, this was a power reserved to God alone. Next, Christ accepted adoration. So Jesus permitted people to adore him or prostrate themselves before him or at his feet. And that's something that was only fitting for God. And Jesus identified himself as God. So here I'm just going to read these last two paragraphs for this section. Finally, Jesus made revealing statements about himself. I am the bread of life. This is the bread which comes down from heaven. And I am the way, the truth, and the life. And he also used the name that is reserved for God alone. Quote, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. End quote. Quote, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. End quote. And I am is precisely the divine name that was revealed to Moses. All right, next section. True God and true man. Okay, so yes, we've already covered this, but it's definitely worth going through again because it can be a bit confusing, especially if you're not like familiar with the terminology or very familiar with the terminology. So, Jesus Christ, true God, true man. So, as God the Son, or as the Son of God, he has a divine nature, the same divine nature that God the Father has. And as the Son of Mary, he has a human nature. And again, when we're talking about nature, we're talking about what. So what Jesus is. Now, the last part of this paragraph on page 173, I think, is worded poorly. It's the second to last paragraph. So it says, as man, he began to exist at the moment of his incarnation. Now, the reason why I think that's a poor wording is because, like, when you say he began to exist at the moment of his incarnation, you're saying his person began to exist at the moment of his incarnation, and that's not accurate. So, what it should say, as the second person of the Trinity, God the Son is eternal. However, his human nature, that began to exist at the moment of Christ's incarnation and conception. Okay, so yes, we can say that Jesus is eternal because Jesus, when we say the word Jesus, that is referring to the divine person, the second person of the Trinity, God the Son. But his human nature did not exist from the beginning. That actually has a very what's the word I'm looking for? Specific time in which it began. By the way, supposedly my webcam is in California now, so hopefully it should be arriving soon. So maybe hopefully it'll be better detailed than this, I hope. Oh, and also before I continue on, we are going to do a Zoom session, but I need you to, well, we're probably just going to do it during our normal class times. Yeah, we're probably just going to do it during our normal class times. And so that way, it should be easy for you to remember. We're not going to do it sorry. One second. We're not going to do it like every day or even every other day. It's probably just going to be like one time a week. So it is going to be important for you to show up for that. But maybe I'm open to doing it multiple times a week. I probably am. But I would like to do one maybe Thursday or Friday this week. Or Monday next week, or Monday or Tuesday next week. Actually, I don't think I can do Tuesday next week. It would have to be Monday because I've got a thingy. So, yeah, sorry. I know I'm distracted. Okay, moving on to page... Yeah, we're still on page 173. So, I'll let you know, by the way, I'll post I'll put up a post on Google Classroom letting you know, and with the invite and everything, okay? So, and I'll try to give you like 2 days in advance notice. That way, if you can't make it, you can contact me. If you can, then obviously join. Okay, so the second paragraph, or the last paragraph of the page. Hypostatic union. You should know what that is. It's the union of Jesus' two natures in his one divine person. So hypostatic comes from the Greek word for person. At least that's what the book says. In Greek philosophy, hypostasis, that means, more generally speaking, it means substance. So that's probably going to be a bonus question on your next test. All right. So Jesus Christ, fully God, okay, takes on a human nature and so becomes fully man. Now, moving on to page 175, I really like what the book says here. I'm just going to go ahead and read the paragraph. The concept of the hypostatic union is difficult to grasp. How can Christ be 100% of two different things? In a similar way that a person can be 100% American and 100% male. In a similar way that a person can be 100% American and 100% male, Christ's human nature and his divine nature are not mutually exclusive. Having one does not make the other impossible. Christ is holy God and holy man. So one of the things I like about that is, or by pointing out that the two aren't mutually exclusive, is that, okay, we often think in terms of binaries. So we have like light and dark, good, bad, good or evil, vice and virtue. And I mean, there's certainly a very good reason why we tend to think in binaries. However, in some scenarios, that can actually limit our ability to understand things. So sometimes it doesn't apply, or it doesn't apply in a very concrete way, or in a really specific way. Maybe that's probably the word I'm looking for. Excuse me. So in this case, it's not like the distinction between kinetic and potential energy. I don't know if you know anything about that yet. I mean, you either have learned it in a science class or you will learn it in a science class. I think physics is probably when you learn it, or at least one class is where you learn it. So it's really easy to describe the difference. Say you're on a roller coaster and you're at the very top of the roller coaster and you're about to go down like 200 feet. At that moment that you're at the top, you have basically like maximum potential energy, but you have very, very little kinetic energy, because that energy is talking about like the movement. The thing about like how fast you can go on a roller coaster. So when you're halfway down the roller coaster, that car with you in it is going to be like 50-50. So it's going to be half kinetic energy because you're going half as fast as you will at the bottom, and half potential energy for that very reason, because you're going half as fast as you will at the bottom. Then when you're at the bottom, it's going to be all kinetic energy and no potential energy. So this is not a case of that. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Jesus can be both at the same time because they aren't mutually exclusive. Then we have a quote from the Catechism. The unique and altogether singular event of the incarnation of the Son of God does not mean that Jesus Christ is part God and part man, nor does it imply that he is the result of a confused mixture of the divine and the human. He became truly man while remaining truly God. Jesus Christ is true God and true man. So this is very important stuff regarding Christology, or knowing Christ, or kind of like some of the theology behind Christ. You don't want to say that Jesus is part God and part man. Okay, so you should definitely write that down in your notes. Also, this idea of like a confused mixture of divine and human. That's not it either. Okay, so Jesus is fully God and fully man, not part. Furthermore, you should not say that Jesus is part of the Trinity, because it's not like the Trinity is composed of three parts that make up one whole. That's also no good. All right. Moving on. So it was the Council of Ephesus that defined that Jesus Christ is one. They've woken me up at 6:30 in the morning this morning and yesterday. I'm gonna get a slingshot. I'm not gonna kill them, but hopefully I'll drive them away. Anyway, it was the Council of Ephesus that defined that Jesus Christ, one divine person, has two natures, human and divine. Now, this council also declared that the Blessed Virgin Mary can be referred to as Theotokos, which is the Greek word meaning God-bearer or Mother of God. So, as it says, Christ is both God and man, and the Holy Virgin is therefore the Mother of God, for she gave birth to the flesh. She gave birth in the flesh to the Word of God made flesh. Now, this opposed the heretical teachings of Nestorius, who said that Jesus was two persons. Remember, person means who, nature means what. So Jesus isn't two whos, he's two whats. That's one way to think about it. And Mary was only the mother of Jesus's human person, according to Nestorius. So to say that, okay, so when we reject that and side with the Council of Ephesus, we're saying that no, Mary is not simply the mother of Jesus' human nature. She's actually the mother of Jesus Christ, who is God the Son, God the Word. Did I skip something? I think I skipped something. Okay, yeah. So to better explain Nestorius' position, saying that how can God have a mother? Like, that's kind of the idea of it. How can God have a mother? So so Mary can only be the mother of Jesus' human person. So that's how he kind of tried to sidestep the issue there. But no, we see that, or through the hypostatic union, Jesus is two natures, one person, and therefore Mary is also the mother of God the Son, or Mary is the mother of God the Son because Jesus is one person, two natures. So you can't say that that Mary is only the mother of his human nature because that human nature is united to his divine nature in his divine person. Now that might be a little confusing for you, so I apologize for that. Feel free to ask questions, email me questions, or post comments regarding it. All right, so because Jesus has a human nature, he has both a human intellect and will and a divine intellect and will. Now, this human intellect and will is directed by his divine intellect and will. So the human intellect and will is directed by his divine intellect and will. So Jesus was incapable of sinning, and he is entirely holy. So that's two of the implications of that. Now, you may want to ask, you may be thinking, if Jesus was incapable of sinning, well, then how can he be tempted? And I think that's a good question. I'm a little rusty in my theology, so maybe I shouldn't have asked it. I don't know. I'll just speak from like personal experience here. Like, I've had times in my life where I was very tempted to do something. Like, I was in a certain situation and I was very tempted to do something. But it was like I couldn't bring myself to do it. And so, just because we say he's incapable of sinning, that doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't necessarily mean that temptation is out of the question. It's like, because temptation is to be tested, so it's like you're being tested, and if you develop good habits and stuff, then the chances of you failing that test are small. But since Jesus, where does it say that? Because he exercised his freedom in like a proper way and united his human will to the Father's, then like there's no chance of him sinning. All right, so let's move on. Still on page 175. Jesus had free will, so he wasn't some like robot-ish thing being controlled by the Father. Like, if he was, there would be no redemption. Like, he freely chose to sacrifice himself for us. So Jesus properly exercised his freedom and united his human will to the Father's. And so, unlike Adam and Eve, who disobeyed God, Jesus obeys God in all things. Therefore, Jesus is the new Adam. And because Mary said yes, her obedience to God makes her the new Eve as well. So Jesus' obedience made up for Adam's disobedience. Now let's see, next we've got Jesus' human nature belongs to his divine person. All right, so in his soul, as same thing was as with his body, he expresses in a human way or a human manner the divine ways of God. So it's like, how would I describe that? Well, I mean, man and God are different. Okay, obviously. So we would be to say that he expresses in a human way the divine ways of God is to kind of show us how to, or shows us how it's possible, I guess. Maybe that's probably the best way to put it. Now we got another catechism quote. Son of God, this is 470 at the bottom. The Son of God worked with human hands, he thought with a human mind, he acted with a human will, and with a human heart he loved. Born of Virgin Mary, he has truly been made one of us, like us in all things except sin. I think we already went over, or we've already read that quote, I think. Maybe from last chapter? I don't know. All right, so in the one person, which is divine, of Jesus Christ, his two natures remained united and without division, without separation, without alteration. Thus, there are two sets of, you could say that there are two sets of operations in him. You have the human operations and the divine operations. Yet, any human operation was united to the divine operations, since it is carried out by the person of the Word by means of his human nature. Jeez, that's complicated. I should have written out how to describe that, but I didn't. Okay, think about it like this. We've got we have physical attributes and spiritual attributes proper to being human. Like, you can work on things like a golf swing. Excuse me. And you can get better at them. You can learn certain techniques or dances or whatever. I don't know. Doing your TikTok things. Then there's also like more spiritual attributes. So kind of self-control, growing in wisdom, loving each other. Now, both of those are directed by our human person. So my person is kind of at the head of the physical and spiritual operations. In a similar way, well, also we could say that the spiritual or the physical operations ideally are aligned with our spiritual operations. So we're not going to do things with our bodies that will damage or inhibit spiritual growth. Okay? So when it says that any human operation was united to the divine, since it is carried out by the person of the Word by means of his human will, maybe it's kind of like saying that in us, ideally at least, any physical operation is united to our spiritual operations, since it is carried out by the person you are. Okay? Hopefully that's good enough. And therefore, all of the human actions of Jesus can be regarded as divine and human. Now, I want to point something out. It's third line from the bottom here, and I think it's put in like a really confusing way, because it says, therefore, all the human actions of Christ can be regarded as divine, and then dash human or theandric acts. So, like, normally when you see that dash, it kind of functions as a parentheses, or oftentimes it does. And so, like, it by the looks of it, it's saying that, or by the looks of it, it's a typo. That's how it looks to me. Because it would be, like, after the dash, you would expect a further clarification of what divine means. But that's not the intention here at all. So, because theandric, that means the union of the divine and human operations in Jesus Christ, or the joint agency of the human and divine operations. So that dash, I think it would be, like, the way I would write it in my notes would be a slash, not a dash. So it would be that diagonal slash. So regarded as divine and human acts. So like just thinking of them as being joint. That's what theandric means. Then we get the example of Jesus healing the guy who was blind from birth. For example, when he cured the man who was blind from birth, there were two distinct operations: the human action, which was to put clay in the man's eyes, and the effect produced by his divinity, which is the curing of blindness. Okay, so think of like your motor skills, that's the human operations, and the divine operations, well, it's him curing the guy, or healing the guy, you know. So yeah, that wraps it up. We'll pick it up again either Wednesday or Thursday. And yeah, we'll start with the promised Messiah on page 176 next time. Again, keep an eye out for an announcement regarding a Zoom meeting. And until that time. Oh, actually, I have one more announcement. I was thinking of doing a Zoom session with you where we go through some of the questions and work them out together. Because I'm not sure that some of you are really familiar with how to actually go about this. Some of you are, and I apologize because it's probably just going to be, or it's going to seem boring or something that you don't need instruction in, and I understand that. But just for the benefit of all of us so that we're on the same page, I think that would be beneficial to do, just in case there are any questions about that. And I don't think it would take very long. Like, I think we could probably do it in like 10, 15 minutes, because we don't have to do all of them. We just have to do a couple of them to kind of work on them together to show how you go about doing it. Okay, so, or I could just do that in a video. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. So until then, have a lovely evening.